Howdy guys, Paraguay Panther, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be discussing why I think David Grusch is legit as a whistleblower. He came forward in June of last year, and I am very excited to discuss everything that has occurred since that point in time, or the revelations that have come forward to the public. I think a great place to start, or an ideal place, is how Grusch became an intelligence officer, more or less his background in that role. So he's originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was offered an Air Force scholarship to study physics about 2 decades ago, I believe 18 years, correct me if I'm wrong there. And he served 14 years in the Air Force. And he was also an intelligence officer for the U.S. for 14 years as well. The last position he had in the government was he was the co-lead of the UAP portfolio for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, very high up. And one point I do want to make with David Grusch is he was a highly trusted intelligence officer with multiple high-level security clearances. This isn't just some Joe off the street. He definitely had the resume to be high up, and he knew a lot of secrets that the public doesn't know, excluding the UAP topic. So the core claims made by Grusch in 2023 are something I do want to go over. The first is that the U.S. government has a highly classified and secret UAP reverse engineering program that the public doesn't know about. The second is that the U.S. government has recovered non-human spacecraft. One comment I want to make with this is multiple spacecraft. We're talking definitely more than 10. Grusch has gone on Joe Rogan and has said publicly that it's in the double digits. He knows the exact number, but he cannot disclose that due to national security reasons. Another point that David Grusch made last year as well is that the U.S. government has recovered non-human biologics from these crash sites. Definitely an aspect of the phenomenon I want to go into more detail on in a future video, as I'm fascinated by that. Humanity is not alone in the universe. That's the big one. We're not the only kids on the block who are sentient and quite smart. And people have been murdered to keep this a secret from the public. Definitely one of the more disturbing aspects that people really haven't come to understand fully is that the gatekeepers who know this information, they'll do anything to make sure that the public doesn't know about it. All roads lead to the program. So let's talk a little bit about David Grusch's investigatory responsibilities on how he found out this program does exist. So back in 2019, UAP Task Force Director, I'm guessing Jay Stratton. I don't know if this has been made public on who that was, but I'm pretty sure it was Jay Stratton. He had David Grusch look into all SAPs and CAPs. What SAPs are special access programs, and what CAPs are controlled access programs. So what Jay Stratton had Grusch do is he basically said, hey David, you have high-level security clearances. Let's see what the government has, whether it's files, physical evidence. Let's see what's going on with UAPs. What does the federal government actually know? So what ends up happening is Grusch starts knocking on doors. He has the clearances. He starts trying to figure out what's actually going on. Because the UAP task force they were getting some information, but they weren't getting the full picture. And I think both Jay and David had a pretty good understanding that something was definitely going on that they weren't being read into. And what ends up occurring after Grusch starts knocking on doors is close colleagues of his, per his words, would come into his office, they would shut the door, and they would more or less say, hey man, you guys aren't getting full access to what's really occurring here. And obviously that intrigued David. So what ends up occurring is more or less one thing leads to another, and Grusch and his colleagues interview nearly 40 people over the time span of a couple of years. One thing to note with these 40 people is that many of them were first-hand witnesses to this program. So they were biologists who worked on the biological aspect. They were engineers. They actually touched the craft. Another point as well, too, is that some of these witnesses were multi-star generals, directors of agencies, high-level individuals who have a pretty sound resume. And when Grusch was interviewing these people, he made sure to be careful as well as be extremely meticulous because, number one, he wanted to ensure this wasn't a cover for some other secret government program. And with that as well, too, when he was interviewing witnesses, he went out of his way, as well as his colleagues, to ensure when they were interviewing a witness, they didn't know the other witness, so that their paths hadn't crossed and that they weren't leading him on a wild goose chase. And his initial thoughts when all of this information was being relayed to him is quote unquote totally nuts. Like he didn't believe any of it. A lot of the witnesses did provide documentation and other proof to verify their claims. I'm curious what this other proof is. I'm sure picture, video, anything to substantiate that this program does exist. And another interesting aspect of the witnesses that he interviewed, he talked about this on News Nation. There's credible witnesses out there who can testify before Congress on football field-sized craft. So when I hear this, I immediately think of the Aztec UFO crash. That comes to mind. Once again, that's another deep dive I do want to discuss. I think Aztec is overshadowed in a sense by Roswell, but there are so many elements of that crash that I find extremely fascinating, and I don't think the public knows all the details surrounding it or what's been gathered by researchers. Another interesting aspect here too as well is that some witnesses were injured while working on these crafts. David Grusch talks about exposure to an unknown unknown. One can assume that radioactive harm or really anything else, something exotic, you don't know what's actually going to occur. And a lot of these injuries, per him, were maintained throughout the years. Like it wasn't one of those instances where they could be cured. Like this is still ongoing for these witnesses on what they've been injured with. One point as well too is he talks about defense contractors such as private aerospace. They are the entities out there who have the goods. They have the prima facie evidence to prove that we are not alone. There's another sentient being out there. Whether that's hardware, craft, pieces of a craft, they have that. And one comment that he made that really doesn't sit well with me, and it actually pisses me off a pretty good amount. He talked about this when he went on Tucker Carlson, is that some of the witnesses that came forward were in tears, having been threatened throughout the years. Like they were so emotional, they couldn't, when they were providing oral testimony, like they were shaking. You could see obviously they were disturbed by coming forward with this. I mean, to me, that's just ridiculous. I can't put into words how irritated I am, where, once again, a blatant overreaction on disclosing this information to the public, and you have to threaten someone's life over it. That is so pathetic, to say the least. Now, let's get to the meat and potatoes here. Why do I firmly believe that Grusch is legit? The first reason is his overall credentials. I know that doesn't really say like he's 100% telling the truth, but when you look at his resume, he definitely would be the individual who would have access to this specific knowledge. Like he is an intelligence officer, he has the accolades, like he would know who to talk to get that information. The second point, and this is one that has been talked about by Russ Coulthart a good amount, is that the Inspector General of the intelligence community found his claims both credible and urgent. So, the too long didn't read version for people who don't know who the Inspector General of the intelligence community is, it's essentially the cop for the intelligence community. He's not swayed by a political party. He's there to ensure that there is no wrongdoings occurring within the agency. The third point, and one that really, I guess, secures it for me, is that the House Oversight Committee had a skiff with the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community. This was a couple months ago. And Congressman Jared Moskowitz out of Florida, he posted on Twitter, or I guess X now, that based on what we heard, many of Grusch's claims have merit. Why would a congressman go into a secure facility and come out with a statement of that magnitude? Like, it definitely makes me think that they heard something that persuaded them that he is not full of crap. The next part for me is the language used in the UAP Disclosure Act. Once again, this is a video in and of itself, but essentially, last summer, Chuck Schumer and Mike Rounds, along with other co-sponsors, came forward with legislation that was going to go into the NDAA of 2023. It was unfortunately gutted, but what occurred with this legislation is there was writing saying, hey, the federal government, or Congress for that matter, is not getting all pertinent information on UAPs, so we are going to put forward legislation asking for eminent domain over hardware, biologics. They were going to come up with a review panel and money allocated to more or less bring forward a controlled disclosure of what's actually going on. And like I said, that's a video in and of itself. There's a lot of fine details with that. And then following that, the gutting of the UAP Disclosure Act. Unfortunately, the legislation was gutted down by some key members like Mike Turner, Mike Rogers. They didn't want this legislation to go through, and there's reasons for that. But it makes me wonder, it's like, hey, if there's nothing here, why would you gut this monumental legislation? That just seems a little odd, to say the least. And then another point as well, too, is that when Grusch found out that this program was legit, and with him having high security clearances and multiple, he wanted to gain full access to the program, but the gatekeepers more or less told him, they're like, nope, you don't have access. They shut the door in his face, and retaliations and reprisals occurred. And once again, if there's nothing there, why this odd response? Just doesn't make any sense to me. So, in closing, David Grusch and Ross Coulthart did an interview in June of last year. The full interview, to my understanding, is not on News Nation's website, but another YouTuber was able to record it. I'm going to provide that in the video description if you haven't seen it. It's definitely worth checking out. It talks over a lot of the points I discussed. I wanted to thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm anxious and excited to make more videos of this caliber, and you all have a tremendous rest of your day.